Our text this morning comes from Daniel chapter 3, and I'm going to summarize a lot of it and only cite from a small part of it. This is the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. King Nebuchadnezzar has built a giant golden statue and has demanded that when the music is sounded, everyone fall down and worship. But Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego refuse. And when King Nebuchadnezzar calls them forward and demands a response of either worship or be thrown into a fiery furnace, the three say this, beginning in verse 16. O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to present a defense to you in this matter. If our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the furnace of blazing fire and out of your hand, O king, let him deliver us. But if not, let it be known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods and we will not worship the golden statue that you have set up. We know how the story continues. The three are thrown into the fiery furnace and yet are not burned. They are met by a fourth figure in the fire and they are saved. Have you ever been haunted? I don't mean by ghosts. Has an experience or a word or an image haunted you? There are memories from my time in my college theater department that are more than memories. They have the ability to stop me physically and mentally in my tracks. One of my favorite productions was The Foreigner. We had extended our stage out, building a giant wooden box. We staged a living room on top of that box and then used the box as a basement to create various effects throughout the show. During the first act, all the lights would be out, and my friend and fellow actor Adam, who played Ellard, would sneak out and into our basement. I, playing an adorable old lady, would wait just off stage. The lights would come up, I would walk out, I would stomp my foot on the trap door and ask Ellard for some horseradish. A few moments later, Ellard would pop the trapdoor open and extend a fistful of the stuff, not a jar, just a barehanded gift. Now, many of you know this, but horseradish has a very distinct smell. We learned one night that particular smell gets even more distinct when a jar of horseradish is left unsealed in a wooden box under stage lights. Imagine this with me. You're in the audience, the lights are off, you are laughing through a delightful comedy. I am backstage. Suddenly in the dark, I recognize a physical shift in the audience. I'm not sure what it is, only that something has changed. And right that moment, the smell reaches me. It is so strong and so potent. It is a physical thing. The lights come up. I struggle to breathe through the stench as I make my way onto stage. The trap door opens. I look into the darkness and see only my friend's face, tears forming. And somehow, as he extends his hand, the smell gets stronger. There are moments now, 13 some odd years later, I smell horseradish and I am physically stopped. I am haunted. Another production that I cannot shake is The Last Days of Judas Iscariot by Stephen Adly Guirgis. In it, Judas is again put on trial for his part in Jesus' crucifixion. The whole crux of the script, though, is that Jesus visits Judas regularly and pleads with Judas to go with Jesus. But Judas can't. He can't see past his own heartbreak and failure. How could God have let him do that? How could Judas be in such pain if it was inevitable? And no amount of pleading or begging from either man can move or save the other. And when that scene comes to mind, I am haunted. So I will ask again, are you haunted? Daniel 3 is a haunting passage. That's not entirely true, only one part, really. Even if God does not save us, we will not worship your statue. Even if God does not, we will not. This was always one of my favorite stories growing up. It seemed so fantastical and magical. But it was many years before I caught the true courage of these three characters. Look, If I knew that the Holy One was going to protect me from all pain and suffering, I would do literally anything and not hesitate before doing it. But when I realized that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were willing to follow even into very real suffering and pain, that's a different story than the one I had been telling myself. As a child, I had jumped over the haunting part. They went willingly into the furnace because they knew what would happen, but that's not what the text says. I missed the important part of the story. That one part haunts me because when I'm most honest with myself, in the quiet hours of a silent night, I have to admit it's not really ever cost me much to stand up for what is right. My life has never been threatened for my faith. I've not lost work for saying the right thing. I've never been physically threatened in any real way for standing alongside the oppressed. I've never gone without when sharing with those in need. It's not only that I've never faced a furnace, it's that I can't really relate to the pain these three knew were coming. I cannot imagine standing in front of the fire and saying, I will follow Jesus whether the divine protects me or not. It makes it hard to write a sermon, y'all. I tried to make it more relatable by finding others who were faithful in the same way. I thought of Prathia Hall and John Lewis. I dug back into some of the sermons of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. King's last sermon was preached on April 3rd, 1968 at Mason Temple in Memphis, Tennessee. That sermon, entitled, I See the Promised Land, is another one of those haunting words that makes us stop. In this sermon, he describes a dream in which God asked King which era of history King wished he lived in. King moves throughout history, describing times in which God led God's people and all the times that people followed God into the promise of a better future. King then explains he would want to live at the time he lived because he could again see the divine at work. King, at the end of his sermon, says in his own way the declaration that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego made in Daniel 3. Allow me to quote at length. I don't know what will happen now. We've got difficult days ahead. But it doesn't matter with me now because I've been to the mountaintop, and I don't mind. Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place. But I'm not concerned with that now. I just want to do God's will, and He's allowed me to go up to the mountain, and I've looked over, and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. And I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. That was the last paragraph of the last sermon King preached before he was assassinated. Even if God does not, I will not. We often only consider King's work as an activist, but that ignores that everything King did came from his theological understanding of who God is, and that every single person is made in the image of God. King stood up because he believed that with everything in him. And this is the part that gives me pause. While King believed that God was on the side of the oppressed, King did not wait to stand up. There was no miraculous rescue from the very real violence of Jim Crow. Standing up meant being physically assaulted. For the Freedom Riders who rode the buses through the South to demonstrate their legal right to do so, that meant murder. Doing the right thing came with a threat, a very real one, and yet people still chose to do what is right. We walk in the shadow of giants, siblings. We are surrounded by a cloud of witnesses that have looked into the furnace and have followed the example of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and said, even if God does not, I will not. Or to quote my advisor, Dr. L.G., from her recent sermon about Shiphrah and Puah not listening to Pharaoh, they responded, not today. Again, I'm haunted. I've just not had to face the heat the way in which these people did. But I do think I can begin to wrestle with the question, will I do what I know to be right? Will I be who the Holy One created me to be, even when I don't know what will happen, or if I know what will happen will be hard? The civil rights movements of the 1960s were successful in part due to the work that had seemed unsuccessful the 20 years prior. Standing up for what is right might mean walking into the fire without knowing how it will work out or if it even will. But our three heroes today were not trying to answer the question of what will happen, but instead boldly answered the question, who am I? Who am I? I am a beloved creature made in the image of the divine. We have to answer that question first before we can ever have the courage to say, even if God will not, I will. Because it is in that answer that we begin to understand and realize what it really means to stand up. When I understand in my bones that I am loved and made in the image of the Holy One, I begin to recognize that same characteristic in you. And it is at that moment that I will find what is worth standing up for. Let me, for just a moment, begin to understand just how much the divine loves me. And suddenly I will start standing up to Nebuchadnezzar and saying, that's not who I am. That's not who God is. And most importantly, that's not who you are. I genuinely have faith that each and every one of you practices your own faith in very real ways every single day. I trust that you are showing kindness, that you share what you have, and that you care for those around you. And that is not nothing, siblings. That practice is hard work, and it's the hard work of our lives. But I hope with everything in me that we will get the same kind of understanding that the three had when they stood in front of the fiery furnace, or that Reverend Dr. King had. That we will know deep in our bones that we are already deeply loved and made in God's image, and begin to recognize that in others in a way that would cause us to respond faithfully. I pray that we will understand who we are so much, and will recognize that identity in each other so much that we will stand and say, I will do what I have to, even if God doesn't do what I expect. Because that is what the Holy One created me to be. May we be haunted by the love that is poured out upon and from us. May we be so bold as to stand up and so courageous as to take the next step forward until we meet the divine, wherever the divine would be, even if it is in the fire. Amen.